Give me second-class houses and second-class schools. Do you think that all colored folks are just second-class fools, Mr. Backline? I'm gonna leave you with a backlash blues.
Public Schools First North Carolina believes that school diversity still matters, so pushing back on the resegregation of our schools is a battle worth fighting. This is the third part of a series highlighting North Carolina's history of school diversity and honoring North Carolinians who contributed to the cause of Black education and school integration. Part 3, the integration era. When you look at the bigger picture, it's evident that education has been segregated for most of North Carolina's history. There were two eras of improvement, the first after emancipation during Reconstruction, and the second during the Civil Rights Movement. In Part 3, we will focus on the battle for integration after Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. The Brown decision in 1954 galvanized segregationists across the South. In D.C., members of Congress passed the Southern Manifesto to denounce what they believed was an abuse of power by the federal courts over the states. White citizens' councils were formed in local communities to organize resistance on the ground. North Carolina Governor William Umstead created a special advisory committee on education, chaired by Thomas Pearsall. In 1955, the Supreme Court decided on the follow-up case referred to as Brown 2, directing the states to desegregate with all deliberate speed. There still lacked any specific timeframes, approved methods, or consequences for noncompliance. The North Carolina General Assembly passed the Pupil Assignment Act to circumvent the decision. They removed references to race from state school laws and transferred all related authority to local counties and districts, who then enacted freedom of choice plans that required Black families to request transfers and then allowed local authorities to deny the request for any reason they wanted. This method was nicknamed the North Carolina Way, and other states adopted similar methods. Southern states had begun a massive resistance movement to oppose the court's decision. The Governor's Special Advisory Committee on Education published the Pearsall Plan in 1956. It was passed by Congress and approved by a statewide referendum. The crux of the plan was to allow families to boycott a school that admitted Black students and let the local community vote to shut down the school and provide vouchers to white students to attend private schools. However, North Carolina didn't need to use those more extreme measures in the Pearsall Plan because the General Assembly's legislative remedy with the Pupil Assignment Act had effectively prevented desegregation at the local level. North Carolina was one of the first 4 states to have a few cases of token integration in the bigger cities. In Charlotte, Dorothy Counts attempted to attend a white high school, but was met with so many threats of violence against herself and her family that they withdrew her after 4 days and sent her to Philadelphia to finish high school. The year after the Little Rock 9 incident, when Eisenhower sent National Guard troops to protect the students that school year, the local authorities there did what North Carolina's Pearsall Plan had threatened to do. They closed the school and sent students to private schools with taxpayer money. The Black community rallied together to teach the Black students in homes and churches the best they could. In Prince Edward County, Virginia, the school closure lasted for 5 years. By 1960, more token integration had occurred in North Carolina's urban areas and military bases. Only 34 of North Carolina's 302,000 Black students attended desegregated schools by then. That year, the Greensboro Four inspired more young people to participate in acts of civil disobedience and sparked a sit-in movement across the South. Public opinion began to turn the tide in 1963 with the March on Washington to show support for the Civil Rights Act, which was passed in 1964. A national poll showed that 62% of Americans, 73% Northern and 31% Southern, believed Black and white students should attend the same schools. Johnson's Great Society and War on Poverty programs had mixed results, but were a boon for public education. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, or ESEA, gave the federal government authority to withhold funding to districts that refused to comply with Brown and prohibited discrimination against teachers and students. It also included provisions for Title I funding, Head Start, bilingual education, school data reporting, and college tuition support. The North Carolina Department of Instruction was also making reforms to the public school system during this time, like funding a comprehensive school improvement program, creating a unified community college system, and organizing a learning institute for education research. 3 residential enrichment programs were created in Winston-Salem: Governor School, a summer enrichment program for gifted students, and the North Carolina School of the Arts for talented high school and college students are still running. An advancement school for underachieving students who were at risk for dropping out ran until 1976. It served a diverse population of white, Black, and Native American students in integrated classrooms. Between 1965 and 68, the nation was in turmoil that compounded racial issues and took the public's attention away from the school integration battle. Despite major victories during this time with the Voting Rights and Fair Housing Acts, the race riots that broke out after MLK's assassination dealt a hard blow to morale and public opinion, and it also exacerbated the growing divide between the mainstream civil rights movement organizations and the younger, more militant leaders in urban areas and colleges. Finally, in the 1968 case Green versus New Kent County, the Supreme Court declared freedom of choice plans alone did not comply with Brown and provided more specific directives on how it would measure school integration. The Green factors would extend beyond enrollment numbers to include faculty, staff, transportation, facilities, and extracurriculars too. The following year, the court overturned the all deliberate speed standard in Alexander v. Holmes. Local education authorities were now placed under federal court orders to create and deliver on their own desegregation plans with benchmark data. The number of Black students in the South attending integrated schools rose from 32% to 79% by 1971. Though school districts in North Carolina did not force school closures like in Little Rock and Prince Edward County, there were still many white families who pulled their students out of the integrated schools and enrolled them in private. Many of these segregation academies popped up during this time period. Some that still operate today have owned up to their history, while others have tried to erase it. In Hyde County, however, the Black community boycotted the schools for a year in 1968 to 69 over its one-sided desegregation plan. In the end, after a local referendum on the matter, the Black schools were kept open and used after integration. That year, a U.S. District Court declared the Pearsall Plan unconstitutional and established that the state of North Carolina is responsible for desegregation efforts, not the local authorities. The Department of Public Instruction tasked Dudley Flood and Gene Cosby with traveling the state to meet with school district leaders to support them with integration efforts. Ridgeview, the only Black high school in Hickory, is just one of many examples of beloved Black schools that were closed when districts desegregated. Some of these buildings were even newly renovated in an effort to claim they were separate but equal. White students and teachers felt it would be undignified to use those buildings, and many white parents didn't want their children to be taught by Black teachers. The National Educators Association, or NEA, mandated that North Carolina's segregated affiliates merge by 1970. The North Carolina's Teachers Association was an active statewide organization with almost 11,500 members in 1966. By 1969, membership was down to just over 7,500. To merge the NCTA with NCAE, the organizations used internal debate, joint negotiations, and legal mediation to incorporate affirmative actions into their new constitution to preserve the Black educators' voices and leadership. Worried about the power of unionized police and integrated workers' unions, The General Assembly had banned collective bargaining rights for all public employees in the previous decade, so NCAE was limited in how it could protect Black teachers during the integration process. In the wake of a major political party realignment caused by a slate of civil rights legislation, several amendments were passed to update the state constitution. Though voters approved banning poll taxes, they did not approve banning literacy tests, and many school districts in North Carolina were still not in compliance with their court-ordered desegregation plan. The biggest obstacle was the existing de facto segregation of neighborhoods. Then, in the landmark case Swan v. Charlotte-Mecklenburg in 1971, the Supreme Court decided that if a school district was still in violation of the desegregation mandate, busing was an appropriate remedial technique that could be ordered by the federal courts. It also allowed creating non-contiguous attendance zones and using ratios or quotas temporarily to achieve desegregation. An anti-busing movement didn't just break out in the South, but in many places across the country. One of the most extreme cases was in Boston, where protests became so violent the buses needed police escorts. Organizations like No Busing Our Children in Winston-Salem mobilized to push back. Students from West Charlotte High School actually hosted a group of students from Boston to show them how busing was going in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and how integration of the school was not as rocky as they thought it might be. With the federal court order starting in 1968 after Green and busing starting after Swan, KKK violence was renewed. During the Hyde boycott, there had been even a dangerous armed confrontation between the KKK and a large Black crowd. Everyone was on edge, and the white supremacists capitalized on Cold War fears of communism to target leaders with ties to the Black Panthers or Black Power. Between 1969 and 1971, violence rocked 3 North Carolina cities. In Charlotte, bombs targeted 4 civil rights leaders, including NAACP Legal Defense Fund lawyer Julius Chambers for his role in winning Swan v. Charlotte-Mecklenburg. He had already been targeted multiple times throughout the 60s during his work for the LDF. Violence erupted in Wilmington twice, first in 1968 after MLK was assassinated, and again in 1971 after a fight broke out between students at a local high school that spread into a race riot. The Wilmington 10 became internationally famous for becoming political prisoners who were targeted for their beliefs when the white supremacists who came to patrol the area were the actual culprits. Unfortunately, most Black schools were shut down or converted. By 1972, 450 Black elementary school principals and more than 3,000 Black teachers had lost their jobs in the process. Only 3 Black high school principals remained in the state. No district in North Carolina had a Black superintendent or a Black school board member yet. In the 1970s, there were several Supreme Court cases that dealt with the specific terms of state responsibility and certain gray areas like de facto segregation in a northern district. The biggest blow to the integration movement was the court's decision in Milliken v. Bradley that desegregation plans could not cross district lines, such as between a majority Black city center and its white suburb. Immigration to North Carolina began to pick up in the 70s, with growing numbers of Asian and Hispanic students. They benefited from the wave of civil rights reforms, such as ESL programs developed to support English language learners in the schools. But progress would be slow, as the main focus of the time was the integration of Black and white schools. Other forms of diversity were achieved during this era, too. Some UNC system schools didn't become co-ed until the mid-60s, so the numbers start to pick up in the 70s. Before 1970, only 20% of students with disabilities were served in regular public schools. Inclusion of special education students in general education classrooms was enabled by new federal laws and Chapter 927 in the North Carolina Session Laws. During the 1980s, the State Advisory Council on Indian Education was created to improve educational outcomes for Native Americans in North Carolina. Pembroke, which had recently been added to the UNC system, celebrated its centennial after decades of growth under the leadership of its first Lumbee president and chancellor, Dr. English Jones. By the early 80s, the UNC system had grown and been reorganized. It included 6 historically Black colleges and universities and 1 historically American Indian University of Pembroke. In 1979, North Carolina had the most students attending an HBCU in the country, and the highest percentage of those who went to an in-state HBCU. The most popular degrees were in education, which had always been a focus of higher ed for Black North Carolinians, but the number dropped off significantly from 50% in 1950 to 20% in 1982. There was a massive influx of federal funding put into North Carolina's HBCUs in the form of grants for developing institutions. Affirmative action policies were used in North Carolina to improve diversity in higher education, but it caused some backlash by white applicants who felt they were the victims of reverse discrimination. At the same time, the legacy system continued to be used to give preference to children of alumni who were very disproportionately white. By the 80s, there was enough data to begin analyzing the success of the integration experiment. Unfortunately, the analysis was riddled with problems. Focusing on school-level data masked the need for more progress because students were often segregated inside their schools due to biased tracking and discipline policies. When A Nation at Risk was reported in 1982, it masked the improvement of white and Black students' test scores during the integration period. Ironically, the authors, who were so alarmed at the rapid decline of American students' math skills, had done bad math themselves. Later, it was revealed that they had cherry-picked the data to support their beliefs and had erroneously analyzed the aggregate data without breaking it into subgroups, which would have shown that both white and Black students had actually made gains during that time. This was a pivotal point for public opinion on continued integration efforts, since it gave the mistaken impression that integration was done and that it had tanked the quality of our schools. Even many previous supporters of integration balked at the perceived sacrifice of American excellence for racial equality. This alarm ushered in a new era in American education that was hyper-focused on standardized testing. North Carolina enacted the Basic Education Program to fund more educators and create the first standard course of study. School integration reached its peak around 1988. As school districts were released from their court-ordered integration plans, race-conscious school assignment and busing policies would be reversed or continued voluntarily in some districts. So how does this history relate to our current situation in North Carolina schools? First, so-called colorblind policies hurt minorities in areas where de facto segregation and generational inequality are pervasive. Recently, the Supreme Court ended the use of affirmative action in higher ed because it was no longer appropriate. Case studies of institutions that already stopped affirmative action in admissions predict that diversity at North Carolina colleges and universities will significantly decline. Second, one of the main reasons integration efforts were undermined and Black students shortchanged was that Black educators were not equal partners in the process. Their students lost those supportive relationships, and the integrated schools missed out on their valuable perspectives and dedication. White educators and supporters of public education will make a bigger difference in the long run if they prioritize improving teacher diversity and proactively seek out partnerships with and leadership from educators of color. Last, North Carolina led the way at 2 crucial points in integration history. Once with the Pupil Assignment Act that created a substantial legal challenge for civil rights proponents to overcome, and second with adopting busing policies from Swan forward. North Carolina can use its considerable strength in public higher education, HBCUs, and education research to innovate again for the sake of diversity now. Learn more about school diversity at publicschoolsfirstnc.org. Stay tuned for Part 4, Resegregation, 1988 to today. See the video description below for a full list of references and sources.
Mr. Backline.